Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a place where sweat mixes with smoke, sparks fly with every swing, and the smell of hot metal clings to your skin like a second shirt. That's right, we're going straight into a medieval blacksmith's forge. And let's be honest here, you probably won't last 5 minutes. Between the overwhelming heat, the deafening clangs, and the very real threat of setting your eyebrows on fire, this is not your average 9 to 5. But hey, at least you won't get bored, right? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to drop your city and the time you're listening in the comments. I read them all, and some of you are definitely not sleeping when you should be. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open the creaking wooden door and step into the forge. It hits you like a dragon's sneeze, hot, thick, and a little smoky. Your eyebrows instinctively flinch, and for good reason. The air smells like scorched hair and burning ambition. It's not a friendly welcome. Your boots sink slightly into the dusty floor, and you realize you're already sweating through your tunic. This is not going to be a tidy experience. A few feet away, the blacksmith stands shirtless, muscles glistening in the firelight like something out of a cautionary tale. He's hammering a glowing piece of iron with the casual precision of someone who could do this in his sleep. You notice he has eyebrows, which feels like a miracle. The man is surrounded by a choir of tools, tongs, hammers, pokers, all lined up like well-trained soldiers waiting for the next strike. You try to say hello, but your voice evaporates in the roar of the forge. No one told you it would be this loud. Every breath tastes like charcoal, and the forge's heat is baking your thoughts. You don't just work here, you marinate. Your first job? Managing the bellows. It sounds simple, just push and pull, right? Except you have to keep the fire alive without letting it rage out of control. Too little air and the flame sulks like a moody cat. Too much and it turns into a furnace that flings sparks straight at your face. That's the first rule of blacksmithing. The fire is your friend, until it isn't. You reach for the bellows handle, and it's slick with someone else's sweat. Nice. With each pump, you fan the coals until they glow an angry orange. The blacksmith nods approvingly but doesn't slow down. You're starting to feel the rhythm of the place. Metal sings, fire breathes, hammers speak in clangs. Your eyes wander to a heap of charcoal. It looks harmless, but that's your fuel, burnt wood turned into a forge's lifeblood. The science is simple. Charcoal burns hotter and cleaner than raw wood. The smell, though, is not for the faint of heart. Imagine a combination of campfire, singed wool, and old boots. That's your new perfume. You steal a glance at the ceiling, where soot clings like a ghost. One flick of the wrong tool and it'll snow black dust on your head. You learn to keep your gestures deliberate. Every motion here has consequences, from a cracked sword to a second-degree burn. Now it's your turn to handle a hot piece of iron. It looks manageable. It's not. You grip it with tongs that weigh more than your lunch, shuffle toward the anvil, and prepare to strike. The metal hisses as it cools slightly. You raise your hammer. You miss. The iron falls. The blacksmith sighs without looking. Welcome to apprenticeship. You learn quickly that there's no fast way to become good at this. Every mistake is a loud, smoky embarrassment. You can feel your hands blistering beneath the gloves. Your face is shiny, not with confidence, but with unrelenting sweat. You understand now why blacksmiths wore linen tunics. Not for style, but so the fabric would catch fire a little slower. As the day creeps by, you realize you haven't stopped moving. Your shoulders ache, your eyes sting, and your lips taste like iron. You haven't burned your eyebrows yet, but your arm hair is looking a little patchy. A victory, in some twisted way. Historians often say the forge was a sacred place in medieval villages. Blacksmiths weren't just craftsmen, they were practically magicians, turning raw stone and fire into weapons, tools, and sometimes even symbols of power. Some say they held social status just below knights. Others argue they were more like utility workers with hammers. The debate's still open. But from where you stand, soaked in sweat and listening to the hiss of hot metal in water. One thing is clear. If you survive this day without passing out or catching fire, you've earned your dinner and your eyebrows. You wake up the next morning with the muscle tone of a boiled noodle. Every part of your body is sore, especially the parts you didn't know could be sore, like your fingers and your back teeth. Turns out clenching your jaw while hammering molten metal is a thing. Today, you're on forge cleaning duty, which sounds easier than it is. It involves scraping, sweeping, and scooping yesterday's mistakes into neat little piles that still smell faintly of defeat. You grab a shovel and begin clearing out the ash pit. This is where coal dreams go to die. You'd think it's just dust, but no, medieval ash is clingy. It floats into your nose, sticks to your arms, and somehow ends up in your boots. Some blacksmiths used it for everything from sealing molds to polishing metal. Others say it kept pests away. Historians still debate whether that's true or just a medieval version of wishful thinking. Once the pit is cleared, you're told to prep the flux. What's flux, you ask? Well, it's basically medieval magic powder. Usually made from sand or crushed glass, flux keeps the metal clean during welding. Without it, your iron piece turns into a bubbly, useless mess. Pour too much and it spits like a grumpy cat. Too little and your welding rusts into your blade. It's all about balance, which, spoiler alert, you don't have yet. The blacksmith hands you an iron bar that's about to become a hinge. You heat it to a glowing yellow, then place it on the anvil like a sacred offering. Your hammer strikes are enthusiastic, but not very accurate. Every time you hit the right spot, it rings with satisfaction. Every time you miss, it bounces awkwardly and makes you feel like you just told a bad joke at a royal feast. Your ears are ringing again, and not in a poetic way. Some blacksmiths stuffed wool in their ears to muffle the sound, but you've just been using your own growing tolerance for chaos. By now, the hammer's rhythm is starting to echo in your chest like a second heartbeat. This isn't just forging. It's percussion therapy with sparks. Midway through, someone drops a pair of tongs. Not gently. The noise is like a mini explosion, and for one horrible second, everyone thinks someone's burned off a foot. But it's just a dropped tool, and your heart can finally unclench. Still, that moment teaches you that things can go wrong very fast in the forge. Every object is hot, heavy, or sharp, sometimes all three. Caution is not optional. During your short break, you finally notice the forge cat. Yes, there's a cat. Most blacksmiths had one or two to chase mice away from the grain sacks and food stores. This one has a singed tail, one eye, and a personality that screams, "I've seen things." He hops onto a stool and eyes your blistered hands with disdain. Great. Judged by a cat. Again. Then it's time to try riveting, connecting two pieces of metal with a glowing rivet you hammer flat. This is precision work, which is hilarious because your hands are shaking like you've just downed 5 espressos. Still, you manage. It's crooked, but it holds. The blacksmith raises an eyebrow, just one, but doesn't take the piece away. You're making progress. You glance at the nearby bucket of water. It's for quenching, plunging hot metal into cool water to harden it. The sizzle is dramatic, and the steam makes you feel like you've just done something heroic. Until you remember this is just the hinge for the stable door. Still, that's one step closer to being a real smith. Or at least not getting laughed at dinner. By now, your face is covered in soot, your arms are striped with sweat marks, and your knees creak when you bend. But you haven't quit, and more importantly, you haven't exploded anything. Not bad for day 2. Some historians say blacksmiths had apprenticeships that lasted 7 years. Others argue it was more fluid, based on trust, skill, or even family ties. What's clear is that surviving those first few weeks was the real test. Burned thumbs, singed tunics, and bruised egos were just part of the deal. As the sun sets and the forge's glow softens to a sleepy orange, the blacksmith claps you on the shoulder. You only stumble a little. He doesn't say much, but the gesture is loud enough. You made it through another day, and you still have both eyebrows. You're starting to realize that being a blacksmith isn't just about muscles and fire. It's also about timing, intuition, and something you can only describe as metal empathy. Like knowing exactly when the iron is ready, not too soft, not too brittle. This morning, you're assigned to the bellows. Sounds easy, right? Just pump air into the fire. But you quickly discover that these bellows are less handy tool and more angry leather lungs. One wrong pull and the flame sputters like it's holding a grudge. The master smith watches you with the same intensity as someone watching a dog trying to play chess. Bellows control the entire forge temperature. Too hot and you ruin the steel. Too cold and you waste charcoal. And charcoal was expensive. Trees don't grow overnight, and neither do good blacksmiths. Some workshops even had someone dedicated just to managing the fire, sort of like an ancient fire DJ. While you wrestle with the bellows, the smith starts shaping a horseshoe. This isn't just blacksmith PR. Horseshoes were big business. Armies, farms, nobles, everyone needed them. A poorly made one could lame a horse, which in medieval terms was like totaling your car. And you don't want to be the apprentice who's remembered for ruining Lord Bertram's war horse. Once the fire's roaring properly, it's time for your first real supervised forge project, making nails. Yes, nails. They're simple, right? That's what you think, until you realize each one has to be exact in shape, length, and head width. And you have to make like 100 of them. Nail making was the blacksmith's version of basic training. Some apprentices spent entire seasons on nails alone. Your hands are already stiff. Every time you hammer a red-hot bar, the ringing travels up your arms into your jaw. The smith hands you a nail header, basically a little mold for shaping nail heads. It looks innocent until you try using it. Somehow, your first nail comes out looking like a bent twig with a mushroom on top. You try again, and again. Eventually, one of your nails looks passable. The smith gives a tiny nod. You feel like you've been knighted. Lunch break. You're starving, but also kind of proud. You share stale bread and cheese with the other apprentices. One of them tells you he once made 500 nails in a single week. Another boasts about forging an axe head without cracking it. The camaraderie is real. Half teasing, half therapy. Everyone has a burn story, a hammer accident, or a legendary mishap involving molten metal and poor decisions. After lunch, it's back to the grind, literally. You're shown the sharpening wheel, a crank-powered stone disc that spins fast enough to remove skin if you're careless. You hold your practice knife against it, trying not to think about how close your fingers are to the edge. Sparks fly, and you get your first glimpse of why blacksmiths often had singed sleeves and suspiciously short beards. Some wore leather aprons, but face protection? Not so much. Interestingly, historians are still unsure how widespread safety gear was in medieval forges. Some records mention gloves and aprons. Others suggest apprentices were considered expendable learning tools. Romantic, right? You finish sharpening and return to help with tool maintenance. Blacksmiths made their own hammers, tongs, chisels, you name it. Tools didn't come from a store, they came from sweat. Each smith had personal favorites, worn to the perfect weight and balance over years. Losing one was like losing a limb. As the sky shifts to evening and your arms feel like damp rope, you clean the work area. Every ember, every iron shaving matters. One stray spark can set a wooden workshop ablaze. Blacksmith shops were often isolated for a reason. Not because people didn't like them, but because they were basically medieval fireworks factories. Before you leave, the master smith hands you a tiny, slightly crooked nail. One of yours. Keep it, he says. You nod, too tired to speak. It's the ugliest, most beautiful nail you've ever seen. Proof that you're not just surviving, you're learning. You wake up sore in places you didn't know existed. Your hands are blistered, your back feels like it's aged 20 years overnight, and your hair smells permanently of smoke. Welcome to day 2 of medieval blacksmithing. Today, you're not just working the bellows or making nails, you're stepping up to forge something bigger, a horseshoe. This is basically your first midterm exam in forge school, and you're about to learn why these U-shaped pieces of iron were more than just foot accessories for horses. Horseshoes were crucial to medieval life. A good shoe kept a horse working through mud, cobblestones, and rough terrain. A bad one meant lameness, and that could ruin harvests, delay armies, or lose battles. Think of it like putting bald tires on your car before a snowstorm. No pressure. But before you even start shaping anything, you have to learn how to properly heat your bar of iron. Getting the right heat is a delicate dance. Too cool, and the metal resists your hammer like a grumpy goat. Too hot, and it becomes brittle or, worse, burns. Burnt iron doesn't just look wrong, it smells wrong, like scorched blood and failure. The color is your guide. You squint at the glowing orange bar in the forge and wonder if it's hot enough or just pretending. The smith mutters, "Not yellow enough," and you realize you've been staring at it too long. Once it's ready, you bring it to the anvil. The hammer feels heavier than yesterday. You aim for the center, but your first hit glances off with an embarrassing clang. You try again. The smith doesn't laugh, which you take as a good sign. Slowly, a curve begins to form. Not exactly a perfect arc, it looks a bit like a lopsided smile, but it's closer to a horseshoe than a coat hook, so you press on. At one point, the master takes the hammer from you and demonstrates. His movements are rhythmic, fluid, like he's playing music with steel. You try to imitate, but your tempo is more drunken drum solo than graceful melody. Still, you persist, because there's a weird satisfaction in watching a useless metal bar slowly turn into something useful. Around noon, the workshop fills with the scent of simmering onions and barley. A neighbor is making stew, and for a moment you're tempted to sneak off and beg for a bowl. But instead, you chew on yesterday's leftover bread and hope for stew fumes to count as calories. Meanwhile, one of the other apprentices tells you a rumor that in some regions, blacksmiths doubled as minor healers or even exorcists. "Metal drives out bad spirits," he whispers. You raise an eyebrow, but then again, people also believed touching a blacksmith's tools could boost fertility. The line between metalworker and magician was blurry at best. After your break, it's time to harden your work. You learn about quenching, cooling hot metal in water or oil to set its shape and increase its strength. You dunk your almost horseshoe into the water barrel. It hisses like an angry cat, and steam rushes up into your face. You finally understand why experienced smiths lean back slightly during quenching, to avoid getting a surprise facial sauna. Your finished product is imperfect, but it holds shape. The smith grunts and says, "It'll do." That's basically a standing ovation in this place. He even lets you stamp it with the workshop's insignia, a tiny hammer inside a circle. Your first official mark. You feel a strange surge of pride, the kind that's only slightly ruined by the fact that your arms feel like wet noodles. As the day winds down, you're given one last job, clearing out the forge's clinker. That's the gunk, slag, ash, unburned coal that builds up beneath the fire. It's messy, smelly, and slightly toxic. But without removing it, your fire loses heat. So you grab the poker and scoop out blackened clumps, coughing as ash swirls around you like malicious fairy dust. One particularly stubborn chunk refuses to budge, and you have a very modern moment of fantasizing about using a pressure washer. The smith sees your frustration and chuckles. "Forge doesn't just take strength," he says. "Takes patience. And lungs like Bellows. You don't have either yet, but you're working on it." As you head home, soot-covered and drained, a kid from the village points at you and says, "You look like you fought a dragon." You smile. It's not far from the truth. The forge is its own kind of beast, and today, you didn't lose. The next morning, your arms ache so badly you consider becoming a medieval monk instead. But then you remember monks wake up even earlier, and without the excuse of playing with fire. So, back to the forge you go. Today, you're introduced to the more artistic side of smithing, decorative work. And by artistic, they mean you're going to make iron nails. Hundreds of them. Each one by hand. Repeatedly. 4 hours. In medieval times, nails were a luxury. Mass production. Not even a dream. Each nail was a tiny piece of labor and craftsmanship. Nails were so precious that when a building was torn down, people collected them like buried treasure. You've probably never thought about nails before, but today, they become your entire universe. You heat small bars of iron until they glow red. You hammer them into points. You cut them to length. You strike the head. You miss the head. You redo it. Over and over. The forge rings with the rhythm of failure and progress. By your 5th nail, it starts to resemble a bent carrot. By your 10th, you're getting closer. By the 30th, you can almost hear them mocking you in tiny, metallic voices. Midday, your fingers are blistered, and the smith hands you a leather strap to wrap your palm. That's your reward, he says, deadpan. Promotion to slightly less miserable apprentice. You ask how long until you can make a sword. He laughs so hard you think he might fall into the fire. Swords? Maybe in 5 years. Maybe never. Most smiths never do. Because here's the truth they don't tell you in stories. Most blacksmiths didn't make swords. They made nails. And hinges. And tools. And horse bits. Practical things. Things that held up castles and wagons and barns. Glamorous? Not really. But vital. Absolutely. The medieval world ran on black iron, not shining steel. You take a break and eat some broth, the kind that's mostly warm water with a hint of cabbage. The other apprentice tells you about a blacksmith in a nearby village who makes iron jewelry for nobles, twisted bracelets and engraved belt buckles. Apparently, he even gets paid in actual coin, not just bread and leftover pig parts. You wonder if he started with nails too. After lunch, you get to try making a hinge. A proper hinge, like the kind that holds up a castle door. It's heavier than you expect and involves more bending than you thought possible. You try to curl the ends just right so the pin can slide through. You ruin the first one. The second one warps like a sad pretzel. On the third, the smith nods. Almost. That's practically a parade in your honor. You learn to temper the metal, heating it just enough to strengthen without making it brittle. That delicate moment, when the iron turns a peacock blue shimmer, is strangely beautiful. Like the sky before a thunderstorm, the smith mutters. You glance at him. Maybe he does have a poetic side after all. By sunset, you've made 10 passable nails, 1 hinge, and a mountain of scrap. Your tunic smells like a chimney. Your eyebrows? Still intact, though you nearly lose them during one distracted moment at the Bellows. The smith notices and hands you a damp cloth. Next time, blink faster, he says. On your way home, you spot a cart with a broken wheel, and for the first time, you understand every iron part holding it together. The bolts, the brackets, the nails, none of them came from magic. Just people like you, hammering away in the heat. It's a quiet kind of pride, knowing your bent nails could be useful one day. And maybe, just maybe, you'll work your way up to a horseshoe that fits perfectly. Or a hinge that doesn't squeak. Or even, if the stars align and you don't set yourself on fire, a tiny decorative clasp for a noble's cloak. You're not there yet. But you're closer than you were yesterday. The week marches on, and with it, your apprenticeship descends into new layers of repetitive discomfort. Today's lesson: charcoal. Not the fun summer barbecue kind, this is the smoky, grimy, soot-in-your-teeth kind. Before you can work metal, you need fuel. And before there were coal mines and gas forges, there was good, old-fashioned wood turned into charcoal. And guess whose job it is to haul sacks of it from the shed? Yours. You lug the bags over your shoulder, trying not to breathe too deeply as black dust puffs into your nose and clings to your skin. Your tunic is stained beyond recognition. You look like someone dipped you in chimney soup. But the forge can't burn without charcoal. The fire needs to be fed constantly, and your arms become familiar with the rhythm. Shovel, pour, fan, shovel, pour, fan. You learn how to read the fire, not by thermometer, but by color. A bright orange glow means you're almost there. A pale yellow-white means the metal's hot enough to move like butter under the hammer. Too dark, and you're wasting time. Too bright, and you're burning the iron. There's a sweet spot in the flame's song, and it takes a careful eye to catch it. Now that you've semi-mastered nails and have made peace with blistered hands, your master lets you try a set of tongs. Tongs are like the medieval version of extra fingers, and they need to be tough, precise, and resilient enough to hold glowing metal without snapping or slipping. You realize just how many different tools a smith needs, and how every single one has to be forged by hand first. A smith making his own tools to make more tools, it's like blacksmith inception. By midday, you're sweating so much your eyebrows are now protected not by safety skills, but by the sheer amount of soot caking your forehead. Your master offers you a drink, fermented barley water, which tastes like disappointment mixed with dirt. Still, it's cold, and that counts for something. You work on drawing out metal, lengthening it by hammering, then shaping a narrow jaw on your tongs. It feels a bit like trying to sculpt a paperclip out of lava. Every tap on the anvil makes your wrist hum. Eventually, you get the metal bent into a U-shape. Then you curl the tips. Your hammer slips. The piece flies across the workshop and lands in a bucket of horse water. The master doesn't even look up. "At least it didn't land in my stew this time," he says. Apparently, apprentices launching hot metal across the room is a common occurrence. You retrieve your soggy tongs, reheat them, and try again. This time, success. One half of the tongs complete. Then you do it again, and again, and then you rivet the halves together. The tongs close. They actually grip. The master lifts his eyebrows, not with surprise, but with something close to mild approval. You feel like you just passed a royal exam. You learn a little about smith guilds today, too. In towns large enough to matter, blacksmiths formed guilds to control quality, train apprentices, and keep prices reasonable. But they also controlled who got to be a smith. You couldn't just hang up a sign and start pounding metal. There were exams. Sometimes bribes. Often politics. Guilds were useful, your master says, and also a pain in the backside. History books are divided on how much power guilds really held. Some say they protected craftsmen, others claim they just protected themselves. As the sun dips, you help the smith repair an old plowshare, the iron wedge that cuts into soil. It's dull and cracked, and the farmer who brings it in says if it breaks again, he'll have to till by hand. Suddenly, your job feels less like hammering metal, and more like saving backs. You heat, reshape, and quench. When it cools, the edge shines faintly. The farmer thanks you with a small loaf of bread. It's hard as iron but made with respect. You accept it like a knight receiving a sacred relic. By evening, you sit near the forge, your tongs resting beside you. They're clunky, a little off-center, and far from perfect. But they're yours. Your first real tool. And from now on, every nail, hinge, or blade you make will pass through their grip. You run a finger along the edge and smile. That night, your dreams are filled with firelight and ringing anvils. Not exactly peaceful, but oddly satisfying. You're starting to think that maybe, just maybe, you might survive long enough to learn how to make something sharp. The next morning starts with a noise you've come to dread, iron shrieking against iron. It's the sound of filing, and your master is sharpening a chisel. You're just barely awake, hair stuck to your face from the forge's sticky heat, when he tosses you a bent piece of scrap. "Make it flat," he says, already walking away. That's the assignment. No hints. Just make it flat. It sounds easy. You quickly learn it's not. The anvil is unforgiving. You strike the iron, but instead of flattening evenly, it warps like a stubborn old shoe. You flip it, strike again. It curls. You sigh. The master watches from the corner with the slight smirk of a man who's watched this exact failure 100 times. It's a quiet reminder that blacksmithing is as much finesse as it is force. And right now, you're all force and no finesse. But today's not just about flat bars. Today, you're introduced to the world of tempering, one of the blacksmith's secret arts. You're told that heating and quenching a blade isn't just for drama, it's to harden the metal without making it brittle. It's a delicate dance between temperature and timing, and you, my friend, are dancing in clogs. First, you reheat the edge of a small blade until it's cherry red. Then, you plunge it into water. A loud hiss, a puff of steam, and you've got what looks like a usable blade, until it snaps with a flick from your finger. The master nods. Too hot, too fast, he says. Try again. You repeat the process, this time using oil, which smells like someone deep-fried an old shoe. The flame leaps up, singes your forearm hair again, but the result is better. Still wobbly, but not disastrous. You polish the blade lightly and notice faint colors, gold, brown, purple, dancing on the surface. Your master explains that these are tempering colors, signals of the metal's internal structure. This is the blacksmith's thermometer, and it's beautiful in a grimy, slightly dangerous kind of way. Later, a local villager comes in with a broken sickle. You listen as your master questions him, not just about the tool, but how he uses it. What kind of crops? How dry is the field? Does he swing hard or pull gently? You realize that a smith isn't just a hammer swinger, they're a silent engineer. A broken blade isn't always the metal's fault. Sometimes, it's the hand that wields it. You're tasked with reforging the sickle, and you copy its curve onto a blank strip. It's trickier than it looks. The curved shape warps as you heat and bend it, and getting it symmetrical feels like drawing a perfect circle with a potato. Eventually, after multiple reheats and some muttered curses, under your breath of course, you get it close enough. The master approves it with a grunt, blacksmith for not bad. The afternoon is spent filing, fitting, and attaching a wooden handle. It's sticky work, and the glue smells like boiled hooves. Which, fun fact, is probably exactly what it is. As you work, the master regales you with a story about how some smiths in other villages would temper blades in the urine of red-headed boys. You pause mid-sanding. He raises an eyebrow. Don't ask, he says. And don't try it. Whether that's true or one of those trade myths passed down just to mess with apprentices, no one really knows. But scholars do debate the regional quirks of tempering across Europe, and some genuinely odd materials have made the list. Everything from goat milk to cabbage water. No one agrees which worked best. Maybe none of them. But it makes for a good tale when the work is dull. As the sun fades, the sickle is finished. You hand it back to the farmer, and he thanks you with a toothless smile and a sack of dried apples. You munch one as you sit by the forge, nursing a thumb you smashed earlier. The apples are tough, but sweet. They taste like effort. You clean your tools, carefully oiling the hammerheads, hanging the tongs back on their hooks. You don't want rust. Not now, not ever. The forge fire is low, casting a gentle orange hue across the shop. You look around and realize something strange. You feel at home here. Dirty, exhausted, slightly burned, but oddly proud. And as you lie down on your straw mat, with soot still in your hair and your arms buzzing from a day's work, you start to dream of sparks and steel again. But this time, it's not chaos. It's craft. You're starting to understand the rhythm now. Blacksmithing isn't just work, it's a kind of strange, hot meditation, interrupted only by smoke, shouting, and the occasional flying ember. But today's lesson isn't about making anything fancy. It's about nails. Thousands of them. You probably don't think about nails. Most people don't. But in medieval times, nails were gold. Okay, not literally. But they were expensive, labor-intensive, and surprisingly tricky to make. So guess what your task is? Yep. You're going to spend the entire day making a bucket of nails. Each one by hand. Each one from scratch. No pressure. First, you draw out thin rods of iron. Then you heat them, one by one, and use the hardy tool, a square-edged protrusion in the anvil, to cut them into nail-length segments. Your master shows you how to taper the tip, flatten the head, and give it a good whack with the header tool to make it, well, nail-ish. You try. Your first dozen look like iron mushrooms, or very sad carrots. But after about 50 attempts, something clicks. You find the angle, the timing, the bounce of the hammer. Your nails start to look competent. Not perfect, but usable. You begin to appreciate just how much time medieval construction must have taken. Every board, every joint, held together with these tiny pins of metal that someone, somewhere, spent a whole day forging. You feel oddly connected to them. Like you've joined a lineage of exhausted apprentices with soot in their eyebrows. Now comes the strange part. Your master introduces you to the nail collector, an actual profession in some areas. These folks roamed battlefields, shipwrecks, or even burned down homes just to salvage old nails. Because iron was too valuable to waste. Nails were precious. There's even a story your master tells you about a thief who once stole a coffin, not for the body, but for the nails. That's commitment, he says, then laughs through a mouthful of bread. Later in the afternoon, you're sent to deliver some nails to a local carpenter. He's building a new door and greets you with a nod. As you watch him work, you realize something else. A blacksmith isn't just isolated in a smoky workshop. You're part of a bigger system. Farmers, carpenters, wheelwrights, they all rely on you. The whole village does. Your nails will hold up shutters during storms. Your hinges will secure pantry doors. Your tools will shape someone else's harvest. Back at the forge, you're allowed to try something more decorative, a wrought iron hook. You twist it into a spiral, trying to keep the design symmetrical. It's fiddly work, but fun. You start to see how blacksmithing could be an art form. The master shows you a box of old projects, delicate scrolls, ornate brackets, and a pair of tongs shaped like a bird's beak. Some are his. Some, he says, are from a smith 3 generations back. The detail is breathtaking. And here's a little-known fact. Some blacksmiths used their own maker's marks, a small symbol stamped onto tools or horseshoes, kind of like a medieval brand logo. One smith's mark was a tiny rabbit. Another, just a crooked line. No one agrees on why some used them and some didn't. Scholars argue whether it was pride, identification, or just habit. But you think it's kind of sweet. Like a secret signature left behind in steel. Before closing shop, you sharpen the tongs. The master nods in approval. You've earned something tonight, your own pair of basic tools. They're simple, crude, but they're yours. And when he tells you to keep them clean, he's not joking. A rusty hammer is a useless hammer. And in this shop, useless tools get melted down into nails. The forge is quiet as the coals fade to a dull red. You wash your face in a wooden basin, stare at your blackened hands, and laugh softly. There's no part of you that's clean anymore. But there's something kind of beautiful about that. You've learned to shape metal, and in return, it's shaped you. You wake up sore. Every part of you aches. Shoulders, wrists, even your fingers, which feel like they've been arguing with a hammer all night. And honestly, they have. But there's no sleeping in. The village isn't going to wait for your muscles to stop complaining. There's a wagon outside with a broken axle, and guess who's been volunteered to fix the iron fittings? That's right, you. You arrive at the wagon wheel like it's some kind of beast from a fable. Enormous. Heavy. Caked with mud and splinters. The farmer who owns it gives you a skeptical look, like he doesn't trust that someone with eyebrows still intact could possibly be competent. But your master waves him off and sets you to work. Time to prove yourself. The first job is reforging the iron tire. That's the band that goes around the wooden wheel to keep it from exploding under pressure. This isn't just bending metal. You have to heat the strip of iron evenly, curve it into a perfect circle, and get the timing right so that when you drop it onto the wheel, it contracts just enough as it cools to clamp everything tightly together. Too small, and it cracks the wheel. Too big, and it just falls off. Basically, you have one shot, and it's probably going to involve fire, panic, and yelling. You heat the strip. Your face burns. Your arms shake. You hammer it into a rough ring and clamp the ends. The master says nothing, just watches. The pressure is unbearable. Then you lug the glowing ring across the yard and drop it onto the wheel like a dragon offering a gift. It hisses. It smokes. It settles. And, miracle of miracles, it holds. The farmer raises an eyebrow. Then he nods. That's as close to a standing ovation as you're going to get. Later, you work on making hinges for a barn door. These aren't your average modern hardware store hinges. They're long, graceful bands with curled ends, like the tails of iron squirrels. They have to be functional, yes, but they also have to look good. People in the Middle Ages loved their aesthetics. Even barn doors had flair. You ask your master about styles, and he rattles off types. Fleur-de-lis ends, fishtail hinges, gooseneck curves. There's a whole vocabulary to it. As you shape the iron, you remember something else. Blacksmiths sometimes served as village scribes. You heard it last night in the tavern. Because they could read invoices and orders, they often handled trade documentation, even minor legal affairs. That means you're not just learning to hit things with hammers. You're entering a profession that's part craftsman, part bureaucrat. Weird combo, but it kind of makes sense. Of course, not every village blacksmith had this kind of respect. In some regions, especially where superstition ran high, blacksmiths were seen as borderline magical, or borderline dangerous. You worked with fire and transformed raw earth into tools. That looked suspiciously like alchemy to some folks. There are legends of smiths who could whisper to metal, or breathe life into steel. Historians still debate whether these stories were metaphor, myth, or very successful PR. In the evening, you help your master repair a broken plowshare. The edge is cracked and needs reforging. You watch him heat it, fold it, hammer it, just like you would with bread dough, only this dough fights back. The rhythm is almost musical. Tap tap, flip. Tap tap, turn. You realize the forge isn't just a place of labor. It's a stage, a dance. One misstep and it all falls apart, but when it works, it's like magic. Your final task before sleep is sharpening a set of shears. They're used for trimming wool and probably haven't been cleaned since the last sheep rebellion. You grind the blades, testing them on a strip of leather. They squeak with protest, then slice clean. Satisfying. There's a little decorative swirl on the handle, and you ask about it. Your master shrugs. Some smiths add them. Some don't. Some say it honors the goddess of the hearth. Others say it's just a good way to kill time. Classic medieval logic. You wash up, hands still reeking of iron and sweat. You glance in the mirror, or rather, the polished tin that passes for one, and spot a streak of soot across your nose. You laugh. Quietly. You've earned it. One more day down. You didn't burn your eyebrows. You didn't drop the wagon wheel. You didn't get cursed for performing blacksmith sorcery. Not bad, rookie. This morning, you're tasked with something deceptively simple. Nails. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. And you'd think, after everything you've survived this week, fire, soot, scowling farmers, nails would be a walk in the medieval park. But, oh no. Each nail is a tiny exercise in precision, rhythm, and wrist endurance. And trust me, if you mess up even slightly, your master will know. He's got that uncanny sixth sense all blacksmiths seem to develop, like he can smell a bent shank from 20 paces. You start with rods of iron, slicing them into little lengths called nail rods. Then it's on to the anvil. Heat, hold, flatten one end into a point, flip, snip, and hammer the other end into a head. Over and over again. By the 50th nail, your arms feel like they're filled with molten lead. By the 100th, you're convinced you're being punished for something in a past life. Blacksmiths weren't just muscle, they were metronomes in aprons. The villagers treat nails like treasure. A good blacksmith could make over 1,000 nails in a day, and each one mattered. You think of them like the zip ties of the Middle Ages, essential, humble, and utterly unglamorous. But try building a barn without them and see how long it takes before your roof falls on your face. Your master pauses to show you a strange curved tool you've never seen before. It's a hoof pick. Turns out, you're assisting on a horse today. Not shoeing, thank goodness, because you are not ready for that rodeo, but preparing a new set of shoes. Horseshoes aren't one size fits all, and forging them requires a mix of geometry and guesswork. You're told to measure the last set and begin shaping the metal. There's something oddly calming about working for an animal. Horses don't complain about decorative fluting or ask for leaf motifs. They just want to walk without hurting. You shape the iron in arcs, tweak the curves, punch the nail holes, and place them gently on the rack. The farrier will fit them later. By midday, a noble steward arrives with an urgent request. The Lord's fireplace grate has collapsed. You're sent with your master to assess it, and it's your first peek into how the other half lives. The estate is, well, enormous. Too clean. No soot anywhere. Unnatural. The hearth itself is huge, big enough to roast a small deer and maybe a peasant or two on the side. The grate has buckled under weight and neglect. While your master negotiates payment, you examine the grate. It's fancy, ornate scrollwork. The kind of thing that's more about appearances than durability. Fashion over fireproof, your master mutters. He lets you help fix it, but reminds you this is political smithing. You're not just mending iron, you're preserving someone's sense of superiority. You file the joints, reinforce the sides, and polish the surface until it gleams like it actually wants to hold fire. Back at the forge, you ask about locks. A passing merchant dropped off a broken chest lock earlier, and it's now your business. It's shockingly complicated. Levers, tumblers, and springs. Miniature engineering in an age that still thinks bathing weekly is excessive. Medieval locks came in all shapes, from sliding bolts to puzzle mechanisms. You squint at it until your eyes water, then finally manage to reassemble it using a pair of tweezers and a prayer. Some say blacksmiths invented locksmithing, your master says. Others say we just stole it from the Romans. He shrugs. Historians are still arguing. You end your day making nails again, because the universe is round and full of iron. But this time, you find a rhythm. Heat. Flatten. Clip. Head. You hum as you go. Not a song exactly, more like a forge lullaby. You picture all the places your nails will end up. A stable door. A ship hull. Someone's wedding chest. Tiny anchors in the vast story of the world. Your eyebrows are singed, but intact. Your tunic smells like smoke and sweat. You've got black under your nails and soot on your chin. But you made things today, useful things. Quiet, unremarkable things. And somewhere out there, those things will hold something together. A beam. A boot. A barn. You lie down in the apprentice's corner, roll onto your side, and smile. Your fingers twitch in your sleep, still miming the shape of a perfect nail head. The forge is quiet this morning, eerily so. No clanging. No hissing. Just the soft rustle of a broom as your master sweeps last night's ash into a growing gray mountain. Inspection day, he mutters without looking up. Lord Steward is coming. And just like that, your stomach drops to somewhere near your worn leather shoes. You thought today might be more nails, maybe some decorative hinge work if the day was kind. Instead, you're thrust into the strange theater of medieval quality control, where everything must not only function, but look like it was crafted by the gods themselves. You start polishing the display weapons. The decorative spear that hasn't touched dirt in a decade. The ceremonial sword with more jewels than edge. It's all for show. You wipe, oil, shine. If the steward sees a smudge, he'll declare the forge sloppy, and that could lose your master contracts for months. It's not fair, but welcome to feudal public relations. The steward arrives mid-morning, cloaked in fine wool, flanked by two guards who clearly think they're guarding the crown jewels instead of watching a forge inspection. He walks like he owns the dirt beneath your feet and wrinkles his nose like he's allergic to labor. He circles the display, taps a sword with a gloved finger, then narrows his eyes at the rack of hinges. You wonder if he even knows what a hinge is supposed to do. Your master smiles politely, offering tea laced with flattery. The steward mentions a custom project the Lord is interested in, something about a sun-shaped gate crest. You fight the urge to roll your eyes. It's always about crests. After they leave, your master exhales like he's survived a war. You'll be doing the design sketch, he says. Tonight. You blink. Drawing. That's not hammer work. That's, well, delicate. Turns out, blacksmiths didn't just smash iron. They had to visualize symmetry, balance, proportions. Especially for noble commissions where looking strong mattered more than being strong. While he works on horseshoes, you sit at the workbench with a bit of charcoal and a scrap of parchment. You sketch the outer circle of the crest, then smaller rays around it, each one shaped like a flame. Your lines are shaky at first, but then you remember the gate's purpose, intimidation and pride. You make the rays longer, bolder, sharper. When your master sees it, he nods once. That's basically a standing ovation. Later, an elderly widow brings in a broken cooking pot, and this is where things get real. Repairing cookware was the lifeblood of village smiths. These weren't fancy projects, but they fed people, literally. You heat the pot, tap out the dent, and patch a hole with riveted metal. It's not pretty, but it works. And when the widow thanks you with a tiny smile and a hunk of bread, you feel more appreciated than any gold-threaded noble commission ever could. Some say the real heart of a forge isn't the weapons, your master tells you. It's the pots and pans. The door latches. The plow heads. He shrugs. That's what holds the world together. It's poetic. It's probably not historically accurate. But it's also kind of true. You end the day restoring a battered candlestick. Not because anyone asked. Just because it's there. And because it feels good to fix something that no one else thought was worth saving. Blacksmiths in medieval Europe weren't just artisans, they were community linchpins. They made nails for barns, keys for locks, armor for soldiers, hinges for gates, ladles for soup. And you, exhausted, soot-streaked, and very much alive, are slowly becoming one of them. As you hang your tunic near the fire, watching it puff steam into the air, you wonder if blacksmiths ever dreamed of softer jobs. Scribes, maybe. Or spice merchants. But then again, they never made the world run on ink or cinnamon. You, apprentice of fire, do. Your master wakes you before dawn with a nudge to the shoulder and a single word, cart. That's it. No explanation. Just cart. You blink the sleep from your eyes and stumble outside to see the forge's old wooden cart hitched to a donkey that looks just as sleepy as you. Guess what? Today is delivery day. You load the cart with everything you spent the last week crafting. Horseshoes, hinges, a couple of fire pokers, and a batch of nails that weigh more than your dreams of sleeping in. Oh, and the ceremonial gate crest. Wrapped in cloth. With a note that says, handle with dignity. Whatever that means. You set off down the rutted road with the donkey plodding along like it's doing you a personal favor. The wheels creak. The metal clinks. And every few minutes, something shifts and you have to stop to rearrange it. You've barely made it out of the village, and you're already covered in dust and regret. Your first stop is the mill, where the blacksmith's specially shaped axle pin is the difference between a functioning grain mill and a glorified pile of gears. You hand over the part, nod to the miller, and get a loaf of bread in return. Then it's off to the manor, where the steward who still smells faintly of lavender receives the gate crest like its holy relic. You don't get a thank you, but at least he doesn't sneeze this time. The real adventure begins when you hit the forest road. You're halfway between towns when the front wheel gives a groan that sounds suspiciously final. You stop, kneel, and realize the iron rim has loosened. Great. Fortunately, you're a blacksmith's apprentice. This is literally your job. You prop the cart, pull out a small hammer, and using a rock as a makeshift anvil, start hammering the rim back in place. The donkey watches you with mild judgment. A squirrel throws something at your head. It's not glamorous, but it works. You finally reach the neighboring village in the late afternoon. You deliver a bundle of nails to a carpenter, a wrought iron gate latched to the town hall, and a replacement soup hook to the tavern. The tavern owner insists you stay for a drink, on the house. It's weak ale, barely more than flavored water. But after a day like this, it's nectar. As the sun dips, you start your return journey. The road back is cooler, quieter. The metal in the cart sings a different kind of music now. Lighter, somehow, like the weight of purpose has shifted. You're not just delivering tools. You're delivering continuity, stability, civilization, one hinge and horseshoe at a time. Blacksmiths didn't just stay behind the forge. They moved through the landscape, acting as connectors between people and function. Some even traveled weeks at a time, bringing portable forges to remote areas. A few had apprentices. A rare few were women, though scholars debate how many and how openly they practiced. You reach home well past dark. Your master's asleep by the fire. You unhitch the donkey, brush it down, and unload the cart piece by piece. Your arms ache. Your legs throb. But your mind is clear. Today, you didn't swing a hammer in the glow of the forge. You brought its light out into the world. You sit down on the threshold, warm bowl of stew in your lap, the stars wheeling above you. You catch sight of the gate crest, now mounted on the manor wall and faintly lit by a torch. From this distance, it actually looks majestic. Almost worth the steward's attitude. Almost. Morning comes too soon, as usual, and today your job isn't sparks or soot or hauling things up and down the village road. Today, you're fixing a bellows, and not just any bellows. The big one. The one that takes 2 people to operate and sounds like a dragon with asthma when it's working right. Except it's not working right, which is exactly why you're now ankle-deep in cracked leather and splinters. Bellows maintenance is the kind of job that doesn't sound heroic, but without it, the forge doesn't breathe. And if the forge doesn't breathe, the fire dies. And if the fire dies, so does your reputation, your orders, your meals, and your already precarious social standing. So yeah, no pressure. You peel back the layers, oak boards, iron nails, the leather hide itself, trying to find the source of the wheeze. It's a small tear, barely longer than your thumb, but it's enough. You cut a patch from old goatskin and begin sewing it in place, one painstaking stitch at a time. If you mess it up, the whole patch could blow off mid-pump, and you'll look like you just lost a fight with a flammable accordion. As you work, your master leans in now and then with unsolicited advice. Pull tighter. Not like that. We used to do it with deer hide in my day. You nod, mutter something respectful, and keep sewing. Eventually, even he quiets down and lets you focus. Fixing a bellows may not seem like blacksmithing, but it's one of those unsung rituals of the trade. A lot of smiths made their own, even crafting the nozzles by hand and customizing the airflow to suit their forge's personality. Yes, forges had personalities. Yours is temperamental and loves to spit if you feed it too fast. When the final stitch is tied and tar-sealed, you and your master hoist it back into place. The wood groans as it settles into its cradle. Then you give it a test pump. A rush of air flows steady and strong into the hearth, stoking embers into flame. Success. Your eyebrows remain intact. Your pride. Also intact. There's something oddly meditative about repairing instead of building. You notice things, how the hide flexes, how the air hisses through narrow gaps, how the leather smells faintly of smoke and salt. You feel connected to every smith who's ever muttered through this same chore. And no, not all blacksmiths made their own bellows. Some bought them, some stole them, and some inherited ones older than the village chapel. There are even debates among historians about whether traveling smiths in cold regions used compact bellows or simply relied on stone-blown tubes to save weight. No one agrees. Everyone has a theory. With the fire back at full strength, your master slaps your shoulder and says, "Not bad. You might even be useful someday." Which is the closest thing to a compliment you've gotten in weeks. You nod, pretend not to be ridiculously pleased, and reach for your hammer. Because there's iron in the fire now, and work to do. By now, you've accepted that being a blacksmith is a full-body, full-brain experience. And today, your brain's going to be doing most of the sweating. You've been tasked with crafting a new set of hinges for the village church doors. On paper. Simple. In practice. One wrong measurement and the abbot's going to preach at you in Latin for a week straight. First, you draft a crude sketch in the dirt with a bit of charcoal, planning the bends and angles. The hinges need to be strong but graceful, like a knight who's learned table manners. You calculate the length of the iron strips, the curves at each end, the twist in the middle to give them that decorative flair. Your master eyes the sketch and grunts, which you've learned means good enough to proceed. You heat the first rod, watching as it glows from dull red to bright orange. Timing is everything. Too cold, and it won't bend. Too hot, and it'll crack. You pull it from the fire and lay it across the anvil. Sparks fly as you hammer in the center twist, one strike at a time, pivoting the bar like a spit. Your arms ache, your hands sting, but you've done worse. And you've done it in rain. While you work, one of the village boys wanders up and watches from a distance, eyes wide. You remember being him once, thinking the forge was pure magic and the smith a kind of fire wizard. Now you know the truth. It's mostly calluses and sweat and a deep, unhealthy relationship with metal. When both hinges are formed, you quench them in oil, thick, black, and stinking of last week's bacon grease. The oil sizzles as the hot metal meets it, coating the iron and sealing the surface. Smoke curls upward in elegant ribbons, and you fan it away with your apron. The hinges are done, but now you have to test them. You hammer them into a temporary wooden mount and check for movement. The first one swings like a dream. The second, a bit stiff. You adjust the pin with a punch and try again. Much better. Not exactly a symphony, but definitely not a screeching cat in a barrel, which is the usual benchmark. This is one of those moments where you feel oddly proud. Hinges might not be glamorous, but they're essential. Every door, gate, and chest in the village depends on some blacksmith's steady hands. And unlike swords, they don't get admired or polished, they just work. Quietly. Constantly. Kind of like you. A strange little fact? Some blacksmiths in the medieval world were also the village dentists, because they had steady hands and access to scary tools. Imagine crafting a hinge in the morning and pulling a molar by dinner. Historians still debate whether that was brave or just terrifyingly convenient. As the sun dips low, your master stops by, inspects the hinges, and doesn't say a word. But he doesn't point out any flaws, which is basically a standing ovation by his standards. You pack up your tools, rub soot from your arms, and lean against the forge wall for a second. The village boy's still watching, now trying to mimic your hammer swings with a stick. You think about saying something, maybe a joke, maybe some advice, but decide to let the fire speak for itself. He'll learn soon enough. Morning light slices through the cracks in the shuttered window, painting golden lines across your soot-streaked face. You slept on a bed of straw again last night, back sore, arms heavier than iron bars, but you're already pulling on your tunic because today is, of course, market day. And that means one thing: repairs, orders, and an absurd amount of village gossip wrapped in pie crusts and goat complaints. You sling your tool satchel over one shoulder and grab the last of your forge-warmed bread. It's slightly burnt, slightly chewy, but edible if you don't think too hard about it. The road to the market is lined with carts, donkeys, and tired faces. A group of shepherds nod as you pass, and one of them jokes about his gate needing hinges that don't squeal like his mother-in-law. You note it mentally. The squeal, not the mother-in-law. Your booth isn't glamorous, just a canvas tarp and a makeshift table, but it's solid. You lay out nails, horseshoes, bits of armor, and some tools you made in your spare time, which is to say, when you weren't entirely exhausted. Most folks don't see the artistry behind what you do. To them, a hinge is a hinge. A nail is a nail. But you know which ones will hold through a storm, and which ones will betray a roof mid-blizzard. That knowledge is your real product. Soon, a knight squire appears, huffing and red-faced, carrying a warped sword that looks like it lost a drinking contest with a wagon wheel. He begs you to fix it before sunset. You take it, examine the blade, and raise an eyebrow. It's not even steel. You glance at the squire. He looks back at you, pleading. You sigh. 3 coppers, you say. He nods too fast. Done. As you start heating the blade, a farmer walks up with a broken plowshare. Then someone else with a snapped latch. It becomes a rhythm. Problem, heat, hammer, cool, repeat. You don't stop for lunch. You don't really need to anymore. Hunger's just a suggestion after a few years in this job. Somewhere in the lull, a nobleman strolls by and comments on the elegance of your nail work. You blink. He's wearing a hat that probably cost more than your anvil. You nod politely and don't mention that you use scrap to make those nails. Let him romanticize it. Everyone needs their fantasies. One of the more curious things you've heard in blacksmith lore? Some believed blacksmiths had magical protection, blessings from the gods of fire or metal, depending on the culture. In your case, your magic is muscle memory and a refusal to give up. But hey, if people want to believe you're enchanted, you won't correct them. By dusk, your coin pouch is heavier, your shoulders are not, and your workbench looks like it survived a riot. As you pack up, the sky goes gold pink, and the scent of baked apples wafts through the market square. You consider buying a pie. Then remember you still have bread. Sigh. Walking home, you pass the blacksmith apprentice from another village. He's newer, younger, less covered in scars. He nods with respect. You nod back. It's not a competition, it's a lineage. And you're proud to be part of it. Back at the forge, you light the coals for tomorrow, letting the orange glow settle over everything like a familiar lullaby. You strip off your soot-covered tunic, rinse your hands in the water barrel, and flop down onto your straw mat. Your tools are lined up. Your fire is steady. Your eyebrows, somehow, are still intact. And somewhere in the distance, a hammer strikes an anvil in rhythm. You smile. Maybe, just maybe, you'll dream in sparks tonight. The forge has gone quiet now. The last embers dim into whispers of heat, casting slow shadows that flicker across the stone walls. You lie there on your back, arms stretched, soot smudged into your palms, and for once, nothing needs hammering. No iron, no words, no people. Just breath in, breath out. Outside, the night wraps its cool arms around the village. Crickets take up their gentle chorus. A dog barks once, far off, and then all is still again. It's the kind of stillness that makes even metal feel soft. You can almost hear the stars creaking into place, one by one, settling in the heavens like well-forged rivets in the sky. Your eyelids grow heavy. The ache in your muscles has turned warm, familiar. You've survived another day by fire and grit. Sleep finds you the way a smith knows his hammer, instinctively, completely. And with that, good night, Smith. You've earned it.